To talk about this exact topic is the Executive Vice President of the National Taxpayers Union, Mr. Brandon Arnold. Mr. Arnold, thank you so much for joining us again here on NewsNow from Fox. How are you doing?
Doing great. Good morning to you.
Good morning. Well, yesterday was a pretty intense conversation, as we just heard Lauren Blanchard say. Now, are you optimistic that this chat or any future chats will lead to a resolution on Biden's infrastructure deal?
Unfortunately, I'm not very optimistic right now. If this was just a matter of how much to spend, maybe they could reach some sort of compromise. But to me, the biggest issue is not just the spending, but how they're going to pay for it. And Biden seems very, very focused on raising taxes on corporations. He wants to boost that tax rate all the way from 21% to 28%. And he doesn't seem willing to compromise there. The problem, of course, is raising taxes on corporations doesn't just hit fat cats in Manhattan or in Silicon Valley. Most of that higher tax burden actually gets passed along to workers in the form of lower wages or even fewer jobs. You're talking about losing hundreds of thousands of jobs as our nation is trying to recover from the COVID pandemic. It's a bad idea. So as long as Biden refuses to budge, he's going to get very little, if any, Republican support for his plan to spend over $1 trillion and to raise taxes in a way that's going to harm the economy.
Now, talk about, it seems like there is obviously a gap between the administration and the Republicans in Congress. So as far as the talk with Shelley Moore Capito, I am seeing that they want to take a lot of this money and take it away from the COVID-19 relief and put it towards other causes, really. So why do they necessarily want to do that? Do they feel that Biden is spending too much money on COVID-19 relief?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So the last COVID bill, the $1.9 trillion bill, allocated $350 billion for states and local governments. $350 billion. Now that we have a little bit more data, it looks like states are in the hole by about $11 billion. So we overshot the mark by more than $300 billion. The revenues just didn't fall apart and crater the way that we expected them to. And you look at a state like California, they have a budget surplus of about $75 billion. And a good chunk of that comes from federal taxpayers. They have so much money, they don't know what to do with it. They're looking at giving out refunds to every citizen in the state. They're looking at giving film tax credits to benefit Hollywood at a time when we're supposedly scraping and scrimping, trying to find money. I get that state governments don't want to give this money back, but when they're sitting on piles and piles of cash, at some point we need to make a decision. What makes more sense? More money for Hollywood or more money for the roads and bridges that most people think are a really, really high priority for this country?
Brandon, we were talking before this, and you had brought up the point that infrastructure is popular with voters. Do you feel that that is why Biden is trying to stretch the definition of infrastructure and is continuing these negotiations?
Yeah, absolutely. If it was just a matter of doing infrastructure, roads, bridges, highways, airports, even things like broadband internet, which is critically important during this COVID pandemic when people can't go into the office like they used to. I think there could be an agreement. The problem is Biden wants to expand the definition to things like electric vehicles, more money for electric vehicles in his package than there is for highways, roads, and bridges. He wants to expand Medicaid to the tune of $400 billion. That may be a good idea, maybe a bad idea, but it's not infrastructure. He wants to create something called the Civilian Climate Corps. It's billions of dollars for a group that may be very worthwhile. I don't know, but it's certainly not infrastructure. He's using this umbrella term, infrastructure, and applying it to a host of things that aren't really infrastructure in order to try to get them passed. That is one of the major hiccups in these negotiations.
Brandon, we have the deadline less than a week away. So can we see a bipartisan deal reached by then?
If they want to make a deal, if the Biden administration wants to make a deal, they will make a deal. And they know how to get there. And the reason that the way to get there, of course, is getting rid of some of these enormous tax hikes that Republicans will not support. They know that. There's no surprises whatsoever. Republicans aren't going to support job-killing tax increases right now. So if they're insistent on including those, there's not going to be a deal. If they're willing to take those off, if they're willing to use funds, it's not just the state funds. Listen, we pushed out billions of dollars for expanded unemployment benefits. Many states, half of the states now, are saying we don't want those anymore because they're discouraging people from getting back in the workforce. And now that businesses are reopening, they need to have workers so they can open their doors and serve food and sell products and so forth. If they're willing to repurpose some of these funds, and I think there should be bipartisan agreement to do so, then maybe we can avoid a huge deficit increasing infrastructure bill and reach bipartisan consensus. But we got a lot of ground to cover right now. I'm not tremendously optimistic, unfortunately.
All right, Brandon Arnold, the Executive Vice President of the National Taxpayers Union. Anything else you want our viewers to know about these infrastructure talks before we send you off?
Well, one thing I think Biden could do unilaterally immediately is repeal some of the tariffs that are in place. These are driving up the cost of lumber, of steel. They're hurting home construction. They're hurting manufacturing in this country. If we repealed those, not only would there be a benefit to people that are trying to buy a home right now or trying to renovate a home, but because those costs are through the roof, it would also reduce the cost of infrastructure. If we can make things like steel, aluminum, lumber less expensive, then we'll need to plow less money into our infrastructure bill to build the same amount of things. So that's something that we can do to not just benefit the economy and to ease some of the inflationary pressures, but also to reduce the necessary size of an infrastructure package. And I hope Biden will take that advice.
All right, Brandon Arnold, thank you so much for joining us on NewsNow from Fox.